Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the BattleCast. I am joined by the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who took the Reavers to the GenCon finals and won. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Appreciate it.
So, really excited for this. The Blood Reavers are near and dear to my heart in that whenever I just want to have a scrappy, fun game, they're even better than the Godsworn in this regard. I love running them, and to see you win at a time when I think a lot of people were skeptical about the power of season one, it really brings happiness to my heart. So well done.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm happy and certainly very excited to bring faith to all of the season one aficionados from previous versions of the game. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. So tell me a bit about yourself and your previous tabletop experience. What got you into the hobby and into Warhammer Underworlds?
Sure. Yeah, I started playing Underworlds last October, so a little less than a year ago. Got into it through the local community here in North Carolina. In the past, previously, I played a competitive Malifaux. Like many people, I started my gaming hobby in Warhammer 40K and a little bit in Warhammer Fantasy. I played other games such as the Lord of the Rings, as well as X-Wing, and a little bit of Guild Ball and some other games. But out of all these games, I think I found, at least at this point, that Underworlds is my favorite. I think due to a combination of things. One, it's a great game. I think the best of three format is wonderful, especially for tournaments, because in other game systems I've been a part of, there's a real kind of gotcha mechanism. You can be in a big event and really either you get someone else or they get you, and that kind of just creates bad feelings for everyone. I don't think anyone's learning that way.
A great place to learn a mechanic.
Yeah, exactly. And or even in casual games, right? I think the best of three format is great, not just for enjoyment of the game, but also for tactical play, right? Because you want to win, legitimately through a lot of great moves and tactics and strategy, and as opposed to just catching your opponent in kind of a one-off type way. So,
Absolutely,
and also the fact that it's a competitive game backed by GW. I think I've had other experiences in other game systems that are very good games, but unfortunately, the companies that develop these games are often very small and can make a lot of mistakes, either in rolling out games or supporting them or marketing and things like that. So, GW certainly has the muscle behind it to make this game as great as it can be. So, I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I mean, bless a lot of game companies for trying, but I mean, GW gets the product to the store on time, and they support it well. So. And it's interesting you talk about the God that component. And one thing I've been really appreciating about Warhammer Underworlds more and more now is the ability to react, even though it's not your turn, is something I love more and more. I mean, having played Warcry several times now, watching your opponent just do something to you is terrible. So like rolling defense dice and playing cards, and it's a good system. So
agreed. It keeps everyone engaged, and I really enjoy that. So it's a great game.
So we know that you took the win at GenCon, which is absolutely amazing. But have you partaken in any tournaments with Warhammer Underworlds prior to GenCon? And how'd you do, and how many folks were there?
Yeah, so I've been to a few, I guess, shade glass tournaments in North and South Carolina. I've been to, I guess, 4 of them total. They between 8 and 10 people, so
Nice.
Solid groups with players who know what they're doing. I've won glass in them with, let's see, first one was with Steel Hearts last November-ish, and then after that, I think it was Curse Breakers, and then Magors, and then Reavers the last time, and then GenCon. So,
wow, yeah, I mean that's actually a pretty decorated history. I'd say that's very good. Do you have a good local crew that you play with?
Yeah, there's some good folks locally that play that know the game well. I think and that of course is very helpful. And I think also playing on TTS has been helpful as well. I think having access to
Mhm.
games online is great. And yeah, looking forward to the online version of the game which is coming out. Which again is another bonus to playing a game that's backed by a billion-dollar
Mhm.
company that they can do things like that, which are pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have not even tabletop simulator. I've played it for other games, but not Warhammer Underworlds, and it's really something I probably should try because I'm not opposed to it at all. And it's kind of ironic that the official Warhammer Underworlds online game is not going to be as fully fleshed out as the tabletop simulator will be for a long time, obviously, because they're coming out with such a limited release. Um, yeah, like you might as well play tabletop simulator in some respect anyway. So I'll have to give that a go.
Yeah, well, hey, we'll have to get a game together then sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be sweet. So, why Garreks Reavers and what makes them such an attractive warband to you? Why did you pick them, especially in this season two climate?
Yeah, thank you. So, well, first of all, I have to give credit to a buddy of mine, Jason Murray. As I mentioned to you before, I had previously played some of the war bands. I guess were more in the meta, especially at the time, such as Curse Breakers and Magor's Fiends. And Jason gave me a friendly elbow to the side and a bit of a challenge to try things that are different, perhaps a little off meta. So I started looking at some season one war bands and which war bands that I'd like playing, but also that could play well into the current meta of the game, which being a competitive player obviously is a goal we all have. So looking at the current meta of the game, kind of the back half of Nightfall, there have been a lot of really good score immediately cards, especially universals that have come out, kind of buttressed by the fact that a lot of the newer war bands have good faction score immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at Yathari's Guardians, Thunder's Profiteers.
Crazy.
Yeah, and of course, even going back to some of the original Nightfall factions like Curse Breakers and Thorns, they have a lot of good score immediately cards. So a lot of decks are built around that mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
piling on that glory quick. And fortunately, due to the most recent bar update, which is a big factor, I believe, to my success and the success of a season one warband at GenCon, a lot of the more passive score immediatelys were restricted.
Mm-hmm.
So folks that were looking to build those decks had to choose faction cards or more aggressive score immediatelys to build those decks. So with Reavers, one of the things I've been playing around with for the past few months and certainly noticed as I've play tested this deck more and more is that they're really good at controlling engagement and distance because they all start with move 4.
So
And
fast.
is so fast and inspired move 5. So when you have a lot of decks, and I'll use that, Thunder's Profiteers, for example, even though they have range 3 attacks, they're fairly slow. So when let's say a lot of their cards require them to engage with their opponent, controlling that distance and making it hard for them to get to you can make it difficult for them to start going through all that glory.
Yeah.
I think Thari's Guardians are similar. Oh, they're fast, but at the same time, they're also very squishy early on.
Exactly.
So they don't want to be close to the Reavers early. So it creates just a lot of problems for a lot of those decks. So being able to kind of control that distance, but when I want to close and score the glory I need to score in order to get my deck going. So that's
And
a pretty good combination of all that.
I agree. And not to mention, like, their inspired mechanic is interesting, but it's rock solid. Like, pretty well when that thing is going to go off. Like, there's no, oh, do I roll a critical or am I adjacent to you at the start of my activation? You're like, hey, all right, are there enough people dead here? Good, let's get this party started, kind of thing. So
I totally agree. It doesn't require, an action on my part, right? I mean,
yeah,
outside of just the stuff that I normally do with the deck, right? So it's
totally.
one of those things where, if you don't try to kill the Reavers, they're just going to kill you, right? And so
And they'll get inspired.
they'll get fired eventually, right? But if you kill them, then they get better, and they can be even better attacking into you after they're inspired. So it
Love
just
it.
creates some difficulty for opponents as far as what to do with them tactically.
And as a, just interesting point. Like with Godsworn seeing, somewhat of a recent surge, especially with regards to like worthy kill and worthy deed, with worthy kill being probably the best score immediately in the game. Kill
Totally.
someone with 4 health for 2 glory. Like it's what makes Garrek's Reavers, in your opinion, equal to or better than Godsworn?
Great question. Godsworn, I think, so I've, as I mentioned, I have a local friend, Jason, who's a good player, and he's been playing Godsworn for a while. And I actually never understood a lot of the hate for Godsworn and the lamenting that, they weren't any good, or even I heard, worst
Guilty
warband.
as charged.
Well, I just, and obviously the pilot of each warband matters, right? So that heavily influences all of our opinions. But, the fact that I played a good Godsworn player locally, I thought they're pretty good. Not certainly not upper tier like perhaps Thorns or Curse-breakers, but I thought they were competitive. And so yeah, how did Reavers compare with a solidly middle tier warband with a lot of, I guess, at the surface similar fighters?
Mm-hmm.
They start with move 4, which is all great. The one thing about the Reavers, though, which is key, especially with the way I play them, is starting out with a 3 damage fighter.
Yeah, sick. Bless him.
Yeah, no, he's and while he is very important early on, I actually don't mind if he dies early because I can upgrade other fighters. But early on, he is very important for that threat.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with all the damage ploys and upgrades I have in my deck, he can threaten just about anybody outside of Mollog turn 1. So that's pretty key for how I play them, because into passive warbands such as passive Curse-breakers or Tome's Mollog, I try to get in there as quickly as possible with someone to take out a key piece very early on, and that threat really changes how the other person has to play. Or if it's like I mentioned, more of a Thunder's Profiteers warband that also wants to engage, I'll typically wait till the end of a turn, and then of course missile him in, and with that damage again he can take out just about anybody without with even on his own or with the help of his one ploy. While I think unfortunately for Godsworn, they typically need multiple attacks or need 1 or 2 or 3 poison upgrades to make that
it's
happen.
true. Yeah, you kind of need to, you're blowing a good chunk of your hand for that Hail Mary attack with Grundan or whatever. But yeah, Sake has always been and always will be just a force to be. Everyone respects Sake. That guy's hardcore.
Yeah, no, he's definitely key turn 1 for this warband for sure.
Nice. So we're going to get into the deck, and I've got it pulled up in front of me in Underworld's DB. Maybe you know it off by heart, but are you able to pull it up on screen? Or?
Yeah, sure, I have it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go through the cards. You can kind of tell me why you've chosen them, and again, if there's super obvious ones like Ready for Action, we don't need to go into it too much. But you've got 7 score immediately, over half, 1 in the 3rd end phase, and 4 end phase cards. And as you kind of pointed out earlier, you don't have escalation, which most people would find quite shocking. And I found interesting only 1 power unbound card, which I think is also kind of interesting. So why don't we start with the objectives, and you can kind of take us through, why you've taken them.
Sure. Yeah. So in overall deck design, this is something that I think a lot of good players try to take into account. So looking at kind of the cards I have in my objectives, as you mentioned, 7 score immediately, and then 1 third end phase card, but also the 2 that I look at first, right, are cards like Victory After Victory and Combination Strike. I only take both of those, and definitely only take Combination Strike if I have 7 or more score immediately in my objective deck. And I don't know I don't have, unfortunately, like a mathematical reason for that, just from playing games. 6 doesn't seem like enough.
No,
and 7.
We'll have to ask Stephen Van, but I agree. I think a lot of people fall victim to thinking that they can get both. But in a tournament, it's all about consistency, and they're tough. They're tough.
Yeah, agreed. So, maybe Stephen Van can, figure that one out for us, because he has great articles. But So yeah, 7 score immediately is, and like again, like a lot of deck designs, I want to be able to score doing stuff that I'm gonna be doing anyways, right? So things like advancing strike, precise use of force, cover ground. Obviously, it's an aggro deck.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. At the same time, though, and this will tie into like how I played Amon Khusro, who was a great opponent in the final round of GenCon. This deck can also be a bit of a denial deck as well, especially if the opponent is playing more aggro, because like how I can control distance. So when I'm playing more denial and trying to prevent them from getting off those chains of score immediately cards,
Mm-hmm.
I need to be able to score 2 or 3 of these score immediatelys with a single big attack, which I feel like can in a lot of situations. And that ties into the ploys though. So I think with a lot of these things, such as precise use of force, advancing strike, if you attack, you want to be able to hit and take out the opponent, which is why as far as managing the randomness of those attack rolls, because they are random, certainly to make I have 4 accuracy ploys in the deck, as well as some accuracy upgrades. But
it's an interesting point that you make about this can almost be a shutdown deck because of the distance. It's not something that I've necessarily super considered, especially with like an aggressive deck like the Blood Reavers. But you're right in the sense that, if they have movement 3 like Cursebreakers or Magor's Uninspired, and they want to come at you and they need to kill you to score glory, well, because you have the distance, you can sit back, you can draw ploys. And if you can go in there and score an advancing strike, cover ground, precise use of force off a single attack, well, that's going to be a great, get that on the last activation or something. Well, you're looking real good.
Exactly, and that's into those types of warbands. That's exactly how I play. So,
clever,
I think
clever.
If the now on the flip side, if the opponent's playing more passive or more of an objective warband, then of course I kind of move all in and try to throw in as many attacks as possible. But yeah, it's a more the again currently in meta aggro warbands. This deck can deny them some glory. And the last thing about the objectives is a combination of It Begins, Corn Cares Not, and Pure Carnage. So those 3, and this is I think as we all know, any good deck probably revolves around good faction cards, right? Or faction cards that contribute to a certain play style that you can supplement with universals, right? Having one of the themes of this deck is, and it's a theme of the Reavers Inspire mechanic, and everything aligns pretty well, is the fact that they want any model to die, which I love is very thematic for a coin.
Very thematic.
And that's one of my favorite things about them is that they play in a thematic way, which is great and a lot of fun. But with that, it gives me 2 things. One, against, let's say, a larger warband, maybe an objective warband that's going to score a lot of glory through things like Supremacy and Our Only Way Out, and maybe even Keys. And those warbands score a lot of glory. At the same time, they have a lot of models. So my model's dying and their model's dying.
Tasty.
Scoring 6 glory off that at the end of the game with pure Carnage, Corn Cares Not, and It Begins. That's a catch-up mechanic for me. It's also a catch-up mechanic for a matchup with a very aggro warband, let's say, which happened once at GenCon. I was able to score all those to catch up in a big way at the end of the turn. So end of the game.
And Corn Cares Not is a wonderfully powerful card in the sense that, it's if 5 or more fighters are out, and it's any phase. So you could score this round 1, round 2, and guess what? 4 of those could be yours. So, that 2 glory, it's one hell of a card.
It's a big deal. And that card is the reason why this type of build really works for Reavers in the competitive setting for me, and in general, I believe, and works better than other Pure Carnage builds with Gits or Aggro Gits or Godsworn.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, I think the Reavers benefit the most out of any warband for their own people dying. There's just no 2 ways about it.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Just especially with their Inspire mechanic as well.
Yeah, the Inspire mechanic really works well with that, and going back to the Godsworn comment, with Godsworn or Gets, I guess Pure Carnage is great. I view it as kind of like a third end phase martyred, because you're going to bleed glory fighters, and if you play aggressively, a lot of them are probably going to be taken out of action. But I don't think you get much of a net glory edge with that card with them. Well, I think with Reavers, between Core it begins plus Pure Carnage, you're getting a net glory edge.
Yeah, you're right. You're based off of the very same potentially shitty outcome. You're going to just have much more. So yeah, I agree completely. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, it's a good looking deck, and I like that you have at least a couple, one or two passive glory type things in there that branching fate and cover ground at least. So theoretically, if you're not totally connecting, you can at least get something.
One comment too, to your point on passive glory, that I've heard a lot of questions on, is not having calculated risk in my objective deck. So just
especially I see something like Advancing Strike, and it's kind of like, oh, interesting. They're both restricted.
Yes, yeah, or Precise to Force, right? Which is in a vacuum harder to score than calculated risk, right?
Much so.
So, a couple of things. I mean, I thought about including it for a little bit. One, especially with the new Grand Clash rules that came out a few months ago, the demand to have 3 different boards if you have 3 different games, right, or a different board each round.
True.
For me, when planning my strategy with the warband, starting hex location is very important. So I didn't want to be limited by just using boards that had lethal hexes, and in the case of my opponent didn't have one, right? So I didn't want to have my board selection restricted. In addition, action efficiency is pretty important with this deck, right? I want to, if I'm not attacking, I want to be drawing a power card, so I can, for my next attack is really
counts. Move through a lethal hex. It's sort of it. Although getting a glory is valuable, the action is almost directly against what you're trying to accomplish.
Totally agree. And sure, there may be the chance that I happen to have a charge that can go through a lethal hex, but again, that requires very specific board placements and starting locations, or different specific locations of fighters. So that again is limiting. And last thing too, so I've Shard Gale in this deck, and it's my most important ploy.
Sweet Jesus, I actually didn't even realize that. So that's okay. That's pretty exciting.
I'm all my opponents did, that's for sure.
I think for objective wise, what you're saying makes an absolute ton of sense. Yeah, for sure. So let's get into the gambits, because obviously we've got some good ones here. So you've mentioned accuracy, you've mentioned Shard Gale. So yeah, why don't you take us through your gambits and why you've taken them?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I have 4 accuracy ploys, and I think anytime you play an aggro deck, I mean, there is certainly a randomness element to attacking, which that there are a lot of outcomes in any game when you have a ton of attacks that are possible, right? But you want to mitigate the negative ones for you as much as you can, and I think the best way to do that is through good ploy selection, and in order to really land as many of those attacks as possible, I think things like Fuel by Fury, Haymaker, the faction card Blood Offering, which is also an excellent faction card for them.
So good. Holy shit, is it good?
So good. And in the end, Upper Hand really helped me land those attacks when I really need to, and risk mitigate a little bit when in working with a very aggro warband that's susceptible to a bit of randomness.
So I postponed you because I wanted to wait till the section, but Shard Gale, please tell me, yes. What is this about?
Yeah. So Shard Gale, especially in conjunction with something like Encroaching Shadow, it's incredibly powerful because it's guaranteed. Outside of a forcible denial, it's guaranteed, and that's something that is not common, in this game. So guaranteed 1 damage is great to finish off fighters. It's great to get pretty much any fighter within range of being one-shotted by any of my guys. We'll get to my upgrades in a second, but I have a ton of damage upgrades. So, take, for example, a guy like Targor, who is, terrible early on, but when inspired is, 3 swords and 2 damage. If I give him just great strength or Glory Seeker, after I Shard Gale, he can take out a Stormcast model, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So that's the ultimate equalizer. And I personally, as far as the Reavers are concerned, I don't care as much about my guys getting wounded. 1, because I don't care if they died. In fact, in some cases, I want them to die.
Mm-hmm.
2, they're all kind of can get one shot anyways. They're one dodge. I thought about early additions to this deck had stuff like Last Chance in there and things like that. But I found, even though Last Chance is a great card, almost wasn't conducive for the overall objectives of the deck, right?
It's a great point. And one thing I'll point out to anyone listening, which I've kind of just clued into, which again just highlights Jimmy's understanding of this playstyle, is Advancing Strike says score this immediately when your warband takes an enemy fighter standing out of enemy territory. So if you play Shard Gale and they die and they're in their territory, you get Advancing Strike.
100%. Or Encroaching Shadow, right?
Yeah, or Encroaching Shadow, and it counts to... I mean, the only card that requires you to kill someone with your fighter specifically is Precise Use of Force, because even Draw the Gaze of Khorne is 2 or more enemy fighters out of action, your warband. So, like, Ploys, you betcha.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great point.
Really smart.
There have been a few times when either I played Shard Gale in a previous phase, or been lucky enough to have Shard Gale and Encroaching Shadow in my hand, either through draws or just through a lucky draw at the start of the turn. And against like a large model count warband like Gitz or Thorns, just kill the model outright in the power and scored Advancing Strike, right?
Dirty.
Without rolling the dice. So.
And I mean, heaven forbid, you get a martyr to boot, because, like, I don't know, something happens.
Oh, yeah. And even better, putting Crown of Avarice on a 1-wound model and playing Shard Gale, killing it, taking the glory from Crown of Avarice and martyred.
That's a very interesting point. And I've been recently kind of listening in on, I think John Reese was kind of talking about how, did Games Workshop ever intend for Crown of Avarice to negatively impact your opponent for you killing your own fighter? I mean, that's what the card says, so that's what happens. But yeah, that's a really clever point, actually. Throw that on, then Shard Gale. Why not?
Correct. Yep.
Oh, brutal. Okay, I'm glad that we've... Now Shard Gale makes a lot of sense to me, and really clever. Again, would not have thought about including it in this deck, but I just think about, like, you play Shard Gale, they play Shard Gale, Targor and Arnov die, and you're like, probably still worth it.
Yeah, no, totally. Especially with, like you said, at the end of that turn, I play a score. Khorne cares not, right?
yeah, exactly. There you go. You've got it. And so other ploys, we've got, I think they make a lot of sense. Haymaker, obviously accuracy, trap. Yeah.
Except for Ready for Action. That card's terrible. I don't know why anyone takes it.
Yeah, super, super unversatile card. So we'll move on to the upgrades. Why don't you take us through what you got here?
Sure. This overall is probably like the least interesting part of the deck. Is it just frankly a lot of redundancy, right? Just a lot of accuracy, a lot of damage.
Although Hero Slayer is pretty crazy.
That's a good point. Yeah. So that's really for a Mollog, or for a let's say, like, Yathari with Deathly Fortitude and 2 extra wounds from other upgrades. From a model like that, and let's say I don't have Sake, I can put it on someone like Targor or Arnulf and buff them up with Blood Offering or Haymaker and do my best to one-shot them. So that's really just kind of an equalizer in the end if things go terribly early on with my heavy hitters like Garrek, or if just through the normal flow of the game, Sake and Garrek die in almost every game I play, because I send them in early and try to do cause as much havoc as possible. Helps equalize things in the end if there's a big fighter with a lot of wounds. But outside of that, just everything's pretty self-explanatory. Of course, Crown of Avarice is, to your point, so good.
So again, I think an overlooked card for the large portion of the release of Thunderix. But yeah, like it is so deadly. That card is brutal. Talk about making a fighter so unattractive to kill.
Yeah, there are certain there are certain war bands that I can understand not taking Crown of Avarice, right? There's certain builds where I can understand not taking it. But it is, in my mind, it's almost ubiquitous as like an escalation, right? Like, why not take it? It is in with the state of the game being what it is, where a lot of models get killed, and a lot of objectives are scored by killing models. Not to mention, of course, giving up the glory itself for getting a model killed. It's such insurance. Makes your opponent make difficult decisions.
Claw back some of that glory,
It's such a good card.
Yeah, very good. And just thinking about Hero Slayer here for a second, which is funny. Like, I never thought about the the play between Hero Slayer and Upper Hand. I mean, if you're one dice versus one shield, like, you've got a decent chance that thing's still going to go off, which is terrifying.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Yeah, it's also good, especially in a best of 3. I think it was certainly one of, I guess, the fringe upgrades and didn't come into play too often in a lot of games I've played. That being said, the opponent knowing that you have that in your deck sometimes can influence their play, right?
And it's a little more proactive and in your control to deal with high health war bands like Mollog, as compared to maybe running like Forceful Denial, Frozen in Time, the Uninspire, because like those are all 50-50s. So at least this fits your playstyle, which is like, if I'm against Mollog, I'm going to kill that guy.
Yeah, no, an attack's a 50-50, right? So I might as well do that and try to kill him and get the glory, right?
Hell yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Well, that is exciting. And I got to say, that deck, I love when someone presents a deck that is, more than meets the eye, I guess. That Shardgale is just mind-blowing. Love it. We're going to talk about strategy now. So I want to talk about fighter placement firstly. What is the general placement strategy, I guess you could say, given that, in most matchups, you're going to be considered an aggressive warband, or as you say, sort of like a denial aggressive warband. Yeah. What's your general setup strategy for fighters?
Yeah, great question. And that's, I think this is one of the most important parts of this play style, frankly. It was interesting. I don't know where I read it or heard it, be either Facebook or Discord. But after my deck list went up, I heard someone making a comment, or read someone making a comment like, oh, well, all those cards make sense, right? Nothing really pops out. And it is true. A lot of the cards that I have in the deck, they're popular in aggro warbands. I think there's a lot of people know exactly how they work. But the key to this deck and warband functioning in this way well is it really comes down to placement and playstyle.
Surely, when you're wearing tissue papers, armor, it's you got to be smart.
I totally agree. I think and it was interesting at GenCon. There were actually one. I lost my first game. I think 1, 2, 3, 4 times, right? And then for 3 of those matchups, ended up winning the next 2 games. And part of that is because I think knowing how the opponent is going to play, and this is true for any warband, but knowing how the opponent's going to play is critical to how this warband and this deck is going to play into them. Because if they're playing passive, then I certainly try to line up as close to the edge as possible. I try to maximize the number of attacks I have out of the 12 activations plus ready for action that I have available to me. For a more aggressive warband, though, I typically deploy far back. And I do that because, one, as I mentioned before, I like to deny them the ability to easily score. A lot of the score immediately is in their deck. When I have range on them due to my higher move, I'm able to basically control when I'm able to engage and then score my glory as well, and hopefully put them at a bit of a deficit early on.
Absolutely. And so with 5 fighters, there aren't any boards where one of your guys isn't going to be at risk of dying right away. So if you have to, let's pretend you are playing against someone who's aggressive and you are trying to deny them as much glory. are you putting Garrek up there because he's got 4 and, hopefully he lives kind of thing? Or who's the guy you put up front dangling for the enemy?
It is typically Garrek. And that's a great point. So for any matchup, I line Garrek up closest to the enemy, typically, and after that I have Sake and Karsus, and in the back I always deploy Targor and Arnulf. I've seen Reavers played in the past where folks will put Targor and Arnulf up close to the enemy, almost as bait, that the enemy kills them. And I can understand why they would do that, because they'd want to get to inspired fighters as quickly as possible, especially because at a glance, especially uninspired Targor and Arnulf are pretty terrible. But if you keep them back, especially if you play aggressive and they play aggressive, a lot of fighters will die. Garrek and Sake will probably die, hopefully taking out a few fighters in the way. But once Targor and Arnulf inspire, as I mentioned before, they're actually pretty good. So maybe they're almost like a second wave, right? If in the middle of the game, I can upgrade them with 1 or 2 upgrades. They hit just as hard as an uninspired Sake, right? So I think having that second wave can be difficult for folks to deal with.
So for fighter placement, you've mentioned that you're kind of keeping some guys back. You've mentioned you like to put Garrek up front so that he can kind of take the brunt and possibly live. When you were talking about how maybe Arnulf and Targor can be considered like a second wave. And again, it's interesting, like Blood Reaver's inspired mechanic, literally everyone in their warband gets better, like and quite a bit better. Whereas I think for some warbands, when they inspire, people are just kind of like sort of the same. But I think it's interesting that for the Reavers, they markedly improve.
Exactly to that point. They all gain something, but relative to where they start, I think Targor and Arnulf gain the most. In fact,
they become pretty good.
They become pretty good, and
better than Haka and Basha.
Yes, no, certainly, especially for being the 4th and 5th fighters of a warband, right? So it's a above average size warband. And you look at someone like Sake, who gains cleave, and that's great. But if you already have a lot of accuracy ploys in your deck, and he's usually swinging for 4 dice anyways, he doesn't really gain all that much. So I have no problem if he dies early, as long as he takes an important model out before he does.
That's a good point as well. Yeah, lots of people I think want to, sort of keep him around to be the champion. But in some ways, he is the champion by getting it done nice and early. And so we kind of touched on this earlier. As compared to the Godsworn Hunt, I was going to ask who's the most valuable fighter, and it sounds like Sake is he's the guy that gets the ball rolling. He's the guy that separates this warband from the others.
That's a great point. So I would look at it kind of like a baton relay team, right? So Sake certainly is leading everything off, but then he definitely passes the baton to Karsus, and Karsus is usually my MVP in most games.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you have said that. And I love the visual of picturing Karsus and Sake participating in a track and field event. It's very wholesome.
Right. Probably instead of handing a baton, it's like some bloody skull or something like that, right?
Exactly. Perfect. Really, so Karsus is he's the fella who's laying down the law. Now, I'll just quickly go back to your upgrades here. Oh, right. Yeah, you've got the Glory Seeker. You've got the
Great Strength.
Yeah, right. So those guys can really make Karsus turn it up to 11. That's for sure.
Yeah, and with the most important thing for him, of course, is the range 2 attack. Now it's 2 base damage when he inspires. So with 1 upgrade, he's doing 3 damage, which, as I mentioned before, either with Trap or a previous Shard Gale, that's taken out most fighters.
Yeah,
He is a big threat. Folks have always asked me, after a game, like, who should I be focusing on first? Sake is the scariest, right? I mean, if you can kill him, yes, that's great, and you should. But always the MVP for me in games is Karsus.
That's good. That's good to know. I mean,
he's
a hidden gem, but that's actually quite good to know, because once Sake kind of blows his load, like, there he is. I mean, if you can get him before he charges, you should. But if you can't, then you might as well try and get the other fella who's Karsus. So objective placement, placing objectives. Obviously, the only thing you're gaining from objectives is, I guess, denying your opponent and maybe forcing them forward and Fenway Crystal. But is there any advice for placing objectives for this playstyle?
Yeah, correct. One thing that I actually learned from watching one of your videos, Justin, is when you place objectives, there are certain boards where if you place an objective in a certain hex, it can block a lot of other locations.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's one of the great things about having very smart content creators like yourself out there. But I think those are just obvious considerations for anybody playing objectives. As you mentioned, for me, it's it depends on the matchup. Obviously, into like Yatharis, I try to put as many objectives on their side as possible.
Of course, yes.
If against a objective warband, traditionally objective warband, I'll try to put several on my side, of course, as much as I can. I try to position them near the middle of the board or as close to the middle as possible. Certainly not in no man's land, but near the middle to encourage engagement. And last thing, to the point you brought up about Fenway Crystal, if I position them more or deeper into the opponent's board, I always try to place the Fenway Crystal next to two starting hexes, because they're with larger warbands, they're typically fighters that won't even move. They're kind of back there and not doing it. And those are the softer targets. So if I can Fenway Crystal in and have access to one or two of those models that haven't moved yet, obviously placing a objective near two starting hexes is better than placing next to one. So increase the odds of me being able to catch something like that.
Yeah, no, great points. I want to talk about boards, and we briefly talked about this, and you mentioned, and this is a great tip for anyone who wants to play at tournaments, is your brain is going to be tired. Tournaments require a lot of thinking, and Jimmy brought up an excellent point of any decisions you can make before the tournament are greatly helpful. And, if that involves having on your phone pictures of what boards you're going to choose if you win or lose or whatever, especially with the new rule where you have to have different boards, that's very smart. And that's exactly what you were saying. So as far as boards go, let's talk about them. What is your, I guess, take me through your board setup. Obviously, you know what you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah. So, this goes back to a bit to the previous conversation of what matchup you're in, right? If I want to hang back into a more aggressive warband that struggles with close in the distance, or if I'm playing an objective warband, I need to get in very quickly. But let's just say, for example, that I win and I want to be very aggressive. Of course, there are two that make a lot of sense, that line up a lot of your fighters as close to the edge as possible on a long edge. So Shattered Tower is pretty good, because there are two that are in the first line of hexes, two that are on the second line, and one course in the middle. So you can get all your fighters within two or three hexes of the middle of the board. Molten Shard Pit is obviously very good too, because you can have three fighters up on the line in the more aggressive long edge, and then one or two guys behind that. Those decisions are pretty easy though, right? If you win. Yeah,
those Molten Shard Pit is an aggro warband's dream, and it's kind of nice, that all those lethal hexes are just, positioned in one spot. They're kind of far away from where you deploy anyway, especially as an aggressive warband. So, yeah.
Agreed. But the big concern is if you lose, which happens a lot, right? So if I
about half the time, I'd say.
Man, you're a smart guy. So I think for me, the order of picking boards when I lose is important. The first one I usually take is Soul Refractor. Most importantly, because when I lose, most often the opponent tries to diagonal me, right? And when you're diagonal, I want to limit. So when you look at any board, right, you want to have as much exposure to those corners as possible. Like there's some boards where there's like Molten Shard Pit, right? In that corner with the lethal hexes, there are no starting hexes.
Yeah, you're fucked.
You're totally fucked. So that would be a terrible board to offer up if someone thought someone was going to diagonal you.
Yeah, they're going to diagonal you with Molten Strike Pit.
Exactly. So so Solar Refractor is really good because you have, you know, 2 hexes that are usually, they're pretty close to each corner. There's one corner that's worse than others, but you're still within 2 to 3 hexes with those starting locations of that corner, and then have some other hexes that are on edges, so you can, you know, hidden paths in and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, crucial.
Lastly, with the blocked hexes, you can also, you know, I don't care for ranged warbands, right? Because they can attack me at distance. So having blocked or like a Mollog, right? So having blocked hexes is a bonus.
So you mentioned Soul Refractor is your number 1 losing board. What's your number 2 losing board?
Well, let me actually. So I'll send you the pictures actually that
Oh man, that would be so sweet.
Yeah, so you can
secrets out.
That's right. Yeah.
You're gonna have little Jimmys running all over the place, ruining.
I love it. No, I would love nothing more than
Yulthari's players everywhere, just like no.
So the second board, if they win, that I choose is Shishin Star Dial.
There you go.
Yeah. So that one, it's again, it may not be ideal on one corner, but overall, there's a lot less exposure to being totally blocked out from a corner in that setup. So in the corner with the blocked hexes, that could be construed as being a little limiting. But that being said, there are 3 hexes like really close to that corner, so people typically don't line it up there. So overall, that's the one I would choose for if I lost the second time.
Nice. Well, that's very helpful. I think board placement is something that people may not think a lot about, and for some war bands, you know, it might not matter as much, but for some, it is crucial. And I think, as you've kind of highlighted, this deck, it is very finesse, and I think you got to get your boards and your placement working for you.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, there's it being one of the first, you know, war bands, I think everyone, when they first started playing Reavers, the idea was, okay, just line them all up as close as possible and be charging every activation you can.
Totally.
So this deck does not do that and does not encourage that typically. So you have to be a little more judicious about how you activate your models.
And I cannot stress again, if people are listening, this lovely point that I've learned from listening to Jimmy is you can deny glory by building up a big glory score off 1 kill, you know, or 2 kills. You don't have to go into 4 attacks. If you can hold off until the very last one to score a couple objectives, that's the same as denying your opponent glory if it means you're not running into them. So that's a big takeaway for me. So matchups, who do you love to face? You said Yultharis are your favorite. Is that true for every warband?
So for who this warband loves to face, I think number 1 would have to be Yultharis, because they start out so squishy, right?
Yeah.
So squishy. In fact, one thing that is more of a quick aside, that I don't see much, but not having played Guardians, but being curious as to how different play styles of them would work, is building around Galligan more, because people typically just try to use him as a shield for Yulthari, but you know, with starting out with 2 blocks and range 2 and 2 damage with 2 hammers, I mean, he's 4 wounds. I mean, he's kind of a beast. If you build around him, I mean, 1, you're probably not going to lose him turn 1, and then you can kind of buff him up with upgrades. He can be tough to deal with. So I think, but the sad thing is, for any warband built around Yulthari, is that she's so squishy early on. So I think, and not just to, you know, I mean, an example I would use is, oftentimes when playing against Guardians, they'll line her up in the very back. But you know, I have stuff like Encroaching Shadow and Shark.
So you can still hurt her.
Yeah, I don't even have to really attack her to get her close to low, and in which case almost any attack will kill her. So Reavers are tough into Guardians because they're so squishy, and you know, because of the speed of the Reavers, they can get into them pretty quickly. I also think this warband plays well into Thundrix Profiteers, because while they are a little tougher, and I think that it's a little harder for the Reapers to kill all of them, they really rely on a lot of those aggro score immediately objectives, and
Yes.
Reavers can effectively control that distance and deny them a lot of glory unless they move a fighter really out of position. So I think that's a good matchup. And lastly, I think this deck and this warband plays really well in the Moloch, frankly. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much damage in my upgrades and just also my base fighters. I
Mm-hmm.
think sure Moloch's going to kill 1, 2, 3, 4 your fighters, perhaps, but it'll be very uncommon that he kills all of them
Yeah.
without you killing him in return. And then of course we know once Moloch and an aggro Moloch build goes down, or even in a Tomes Moloch build, it can be very difficult for that warband to come back. So there are a lot of
Yeah. There's a great strength in having good damage coming from many sources as compared to, really good on one person or a couple. But yeah, the Reavers, they sting like bees. Like they just, everyone can put out the damage. You throw a concealed weapon on somebody and guess what? It's no joke now. That guy's going to hurt you. So,
No, agreed. It's combine that with a lot of accuracy ploys, things like that. Yeah, I agree. It's they make they make it pretty difficult on the opponent. And going back to upgrades, one of the reasons why, and I know a lot of players do this too, I hate upgrades that are limited or very specific. I always try to take upgrades that'll work on anyone.
for sure. Yeah.
Because again, I mean, all these upgrades I have will work on people like Targor and Arnulf, right? In case Sake or Karsus are out early.
Yeah, absolutely. So who do you hate to face? Who is the person when you see them, you're just like, oh God, my brain is gonna hurt after this one.
Yeah. So for this build, I think a very passive objective deck can be tough to deal with. Like especially Gits and Thorns. They have aggro builds that I don't mind as much, but if they're playing very passive, they don't attack me. If they focus on buffing and the defense of their fighters or putting wounds on them and just scoring their passive objective glory or keys at the end, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Those decks score so much glory in the end, right? It's hard for me to keep up. And two, let's just say, as I mentioned before, there is a bit of randomness in attacking. If you just miss a few early attacks, they can start scoring a lot of glory and make it very difficult for you to catch up, especially with models that have 2 dodge.
Exactly.
A lot of accuracy ploys to mitigate that. But it just takes missing a couple of attacks. You only have 12 activations a game, right? So it's missing a couple of attacks for them to start building a big lead, and then it makes it very difficult. And at the end, of course, if you don't kill enough of them, you're not scoring Corn Care's not a pure carnage.
And just further emphasizing the immense value of things like Shard Gale and Trap and Enroaching Shadow. And in how many games, as I'm just picturing it now, in how many games did somebody throw a Git through, calculated risk and you would just Shard Gale him for a glory? Like, did that happen a lot?
All the time.
That's glorious.
Gits versus Sepulchral Guard versus Godsworn. I mean, this happened a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's friggin' glorious. I look forward to doing that shortly here. So is there any tip or trick or anything that we may not have covered, any hidden piece of advice that you can think of?
Yeah, just this one is just a general a piece of advice that I have made a lot of mistakes early on in playing this game, not doing this, but in this game, very often, if you're not sure what to do, especially early in the game, like turn 1, just draw a power card. I think a lot of people feel an urgency, especially when they have a lot of score immediately cards in their deck, right? To make moves quickly, to put your fighters out there, to attack, to make moves. I think very often the best thing you can do is draw a power card. One, to ensure when you do take that action that you have the cards you need to make sure the result is what you need, but also to make it difficult for your opponent, to make them make a hard decision, right? You don't know what they have in their hand. Maybe maybe they really need to score something and they're counting on you to charge into them or to move into them. I think and all else fails, if you're not sure what to do, use draw power card, especially early in the game.
And so yeah, it's a great piece of advice. Yeah, you don't need to. Blood Reavers want to charge, but you know what? Like sometimes they gotta be patient. I didn't ask this question, but I am curious. If you win the roll off first activation of the game, you haven't been like long boarded or whatever, or cornered. Would you want to go first? Like, do you like to go first, or do you let them go first usually?
Never go first.
Yeah, that's kind of my belief too. It's just like you don't get access to your power card. Don't go first. Okay.
Sorry, phase 1, never go first. Phase 2, typically go first, right? Unless, let's say there's a situation where you're able to put a Crown of Avarice on your one exposed fighter at the end of the first phase, and you're putting your opponent to making a tough decision. Maybe you want to go second in that situation. Sure, but typically you want to go second, first phase, first, second phase, and the second and third phase.
Yeah, so that's great advice too for those listening. Yeah, don't go first in the first phase. It's not a good scene. Well, that is amazing. I have a couple more questions not related to the deck, but I just want to say that this has been very insightful, and it's obviously your shit. I mean, you won a great tournament and playing against some really strong opponents. So thank you for shedding light on a warband that I think just got a big buff through your knowledge. So that's great.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And I've been a big fan of your YouTube channel. Keep up the good work, and thanks to all the great opponents I had at GenCon, especially Duncan Bills and Amon Khusro.
Yeah, then hopefully they are able to find out exactly how you beat them by listening. I do have a couple questions about so Beastgrave Season 3. Do you have any wishes for the next season of Warhammer Underworld? Anything that you think this game could really use?
Yeah, I mean, I think GW is doing a great job. I think they've shown that they're very attentive to the game, that they're with things like bar list updates and updates to the Grand Clash format, and it really looks like the content has continually gotten better, right? I think like most people, right, I think for Season 3, maybe expanding the design space a little bit, right? Of course, maybe not adding something as disruptive as Magic, but I think the things we're seeing, such as adding new keywords and kind of clarifying a lot of how a lot of things work, but just adding a few extra areas of expanded design space would be fun. And then lastly, of course, everyone's wish, clarifying reaction steps. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, it would be. Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, I pity the person who's got to release the designer commentary, which clarifies a lot of them. That's going to be a stressful day for that person. But yeah, I wish that as well. Another question is, how do you feel the state of the game is at the end of Season 2 with the last BAR? I mean, essentially, what you played at your tournament. How do you think the game is right now?
Yeah, I think the game is in a very good spot. Looking forward to Beastgrave certainly, but with that last, as I mentioned before, the last bar list update, I think they addressed all the right things overall. I think the fact that a Season 1 warband was able to win is a pretty good indication of that. And at Gen Con, we saw a lot of Season 1 warbands do pretty well too. So that creates really a fun environment in the game, and look forward to seeing how GW does for Season 3, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they nailed this last BAR. I think it was the least controversial. I think everyone was like, yep, that seems pretty good. I think actually the game is in the best state it's been in a long time. I'm very excited for Season 3 as well. So there you have it, folks. That is Jimmy, the man, myth, legend who took Reavers to the first place spot at Gen Con, and he has, just knowledge dumped on us here, how he plays this warband in a pretty unique way, actually. So thank you, Jimmy, so much for joining us here and for shedding your light on, this great play style.
Yeah, thanks so much, Justin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. New videos come out every Friday or Saturday. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like or even subscribing to the channel, or you can leave me a comment in the section below. Until next video, I'll see you then. Thanks.